there's something structurally changing or breaking about the way money works, which Bitcoiners kind of already know, which for me is another reason why, it's like, how much confirmation do you need that Bitcoin is going to be valued by more people over the near term and the long term future, if like all of the signals sort of point to this global realization that the way money works is changing and the way we think about protecting capital is evolving. So, yeah, I mean, it's probably a big warning sign. And to see gold, I would say my biggest thought is like to see gold move as violently as it did is pretty alarming, and is a sign. If I wasn't already holding as much Bitcoin as I possibly have the ability to, I would be trying to hold more right now.
It's really interesting because the debasement trade is like one term that is kind of trending a little bit right now, and this is interesting because this means that the mainstream, the people in TradFi are kind of waking up to the fact that the money is broken. So up until now, they always looked at like, hey, see, my stock portfolio did so well, measured in US dollar. And it's like, yeah, everything does great measured in US dollar. Even used cars can go up in value in US dollars because, yeah, guess what? The car could hold the price of the purchasing power. The car can hold the purchasing power better than the money that you're using. So everything can go up as Bitcoin did go up, as all the things go up. And so I think right now there's a little bit of a shift happening where people are questioning, yeah, why is everything going up? Like, why is everything actually getting more expensive and is performing so good? Maybe it's not going up. Maybe the thing that we are measuring in it, maybe that thing is actually going down. I kind of see that more and more in the mainstream, and I'm wondering if it's just because I'm in the Bitcoin bubble and I see everything with the Bitcoin eyes. But I have this weird feeling that the mainstream is kind of waking up to the real problem of money. They don't waking up to the solution with Bitcoin, but at least they see more and more the problem with the debasement of the currency.
Yeah, I think you're probably right about both. Unfortunately, I do think Bitcoiners, we are in a bubble, and because honestly, if more people understood Bitcoin, it would be already be worth like $50 million a coin, and there's not that much that needs to happen in between. But I do agree with you. I think that you are starting to see more mainstream media coverage around the problem of money printing, and it's being acknowledged even by some politicians. I think in Europe over the last couple of weeks. Opposition party in Germany is talking about a Bitcoin reserve. There was some talk of it in France as well. So it is happening, but yeah, we'll see.
What do you actually think? Because you mentioned the strategy and what they're kind of doing in unlocking capital. What do you think is actually the impact that treasury companies in general have on Bitcoin, on the impact they're having on this asset?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of personally, I think with treasury companies, and I could totally end up being massively wrong about this. I think the companies themselves need to have an actual business. Like I don't really see there being a ton of long-term value in a company whose total business proposition is owning Bitcoin and trying to create ingenious ways of issuing shares around that. And with the exception of MicroStrategy, because what MicroStrategy has done really is cornered the market on the amount of money that they could possibly bring in, as they, like this yielding product is really clever. And they've just launched a version of it that will be in Europe. And then I imagine they'll have one that will launch in Japan, and so what they're doing is really taking Bitcoin out of the equation and offering the market what it's really seeking, which is a real rate of return that is higher than currency debasement. And so you really actually do just about everywhere need to earn more than 10% to stay ahead of, currency debasement being 7, 8, 9, 10, depending where you live. And also, a 10% yield, if the market gets to a place where they believe that Saylor can reasonably pay this out over time, people will flock to it because right now they're doing the same thing, but they're getting 4 or 5% on government bonds, or junk bonds that don't pay 10%. I mean, yeah, you'd have a hard time getting that in real estate, and so I think that they have done something. It depends on Bitcoin's ability to continue to perform, but I think that they can really drive that performance. They're going after some market that's between 30 trillion and 300 trillion. If they're able to get 1% of that market, then they'll be able to move the Bitcoin price themselves like a 1 or 2 or 3x. So I think that you know, there's kind of Sailor, and then there's everybody else. I'm like, so we look at a company like Metaplanet to me, and there's a temporary sort of jurisdictional arbitrage happening in Japan, but if you can get the Sailor product that's yielding 10.5% in Japan, I think that these other treasury companies are going to have a hard time competing. There's been some starting to sell, and I think you're going to see a lot of consolidation, and it wouldn't surprise me if I know they've said that they're not going to do this, but if a treasury company gets below a 1 MNAV, you can basically buy their Bitcoin for cheaper than it would be to go out and buy the Bitcoin on the open market. So I think that a lot of these treasury companies that don't have real offerings beyond owning Bitcoin are going to actually end up being consolidated and bought by MicroStrategy. This is my hot take, and so I think in the end, yeah, it's kind of MicroStrategy and everybody else. Beyond that, I think ultimately every company will end up being a treasury company because it just makes sense. Bitcoin is like the most important corporate asset a company should be thinking about owning. And so I think that we'll stop calling them treasury companies at some point and we'll just call them companies because that's just a smart thing that everybody should be doing.
I 100% agree, and then I have a hard time believing, as you also said, that companies that have only the goal of acquiring more Bitcoin will sustain themselves long term. Now, if they can be like a bank or they have some offerings or some services around that, using the Bitcoin as the basis, maybe, but they also have to prove themselves then to customers and like manage the client relationships and all of that. So I just have a very hard time believing that any company not offering any services, just sitting on a big stack, will survive a very long time. I mean, depending on how big the stack is, you can survive a long time. I think Sailor Stack is now very big already, and so you can you can make a lot with that amount of Bitcoin, and you can come by for a few years on that easily. And he actually quoted it, and it's actually interesting because there's like those pumps from those locked capital markets towards Bitcoin, and then it's a question of like how many of those pipes you need, and I don't think we need more than like one or two maybe. And so strategy has cornered the market, as you said, and maybe there's a place for second competitor. I don't know. I also don't really have any ambitions to do anything in that space, but it's just interesting for me that there are now companies, their sole purpose is to acquiring as much Bitcoin as possible. It's almost like, hey, I want to acquire a lot of gold. Like, do you want to buy my company? It's like, because I want to buy gold. It does not make sense for me. It's just like a short-term thing that happening because there's locked capital that cannot access real Bitcoin, I guess.
Yeah, and I think unfortunately there was a lot of scam kind of pump and dumps that happen with the stocks. And this is like another, like getting back to the early part of our conversation, people wanting to like really rush Bitcoin. And I think that, this is not an old thing or not a new thing where people want to, wrap Bitcoin in something else to try and amplify the returns that they might be able to get, or they want to produce like a cash flow, like, they wish that Bitcoin would generate some kind of a yield. These are all sort of like variations of old things that didn't work before and they still don't work now. And they're just sort of like, it's this ongoing painful lesson for people who, unfortunately, with Bitcoin, it is like winning the lottery in slow motion. And we live in this dopamine depleted, instant gratification society where 50% a year isn't enough, which is an unfortunate reality. It's totally insane, but it is also an unfortunate reality of how things are. And I think that's partly just like a symptom of how hard things are getting, that, for people to feel optimistic about it, or maybe even just like feel alive, they need to get like this, 1000x feeling or they feel like they're losing.
100%. Do you think that it might actually be a distraction because people are so now focused on those gains in the treasury companies and Suitcoin? Some, I think you mentioned that before also, that people forget that Bitcoin is actually money that you can earn and spend and do all those actually useful things.
Oh, 100% I do. Yeah, 100% I do. And I think that, this is also probably partly by design, and that Bitcoin is being in some ways reduced to a new audience of Bitcoiners into like only number go up. And, the ETFs I think contribute to that because they give people exposure to the price of Bitcoin without them having to actually interact with Bitcoin or have never made a Bitcoin transaction. So I think that's like a cohort of investors in Bitcoin population that's probably expanded rapidly right now. And it's like it's a continual evolution, I think, of the people who are consuming the content and who are interested in it. My feeling is that the money part is, obviously it's the most important thing, but it will be more relevant for people when they start to experience real pain with their own money. And, like we had that in Canada in 2020, 2021 when the government started freezing bank accounts. But that even is kind of like a distant memory for a lot of people now. And, point of sale terminals at merchants work very well here. So, like, there isn't really that pain with money. But if were to canvas like somebody from Lebanon or, Argentina, places where the money is absolutely doesn't work properly, they probably would think about it very differently than the average kind of like Western investor that's just trying to still compound their portfolio faster than they feel like inflation's eroding it.
And there is so many people now like, oh, like it's not going up, not going up. I just want to remind people, I just looked it up, we are a 7x the last 5 years, like a like we started 5 years ago with 14,000 US dollars. Like this is, we are moving now this in a week sometimes. like we almost had daily candles that were as big as Bitcoin was just 5 years ago. And 5 years is nothing. I think 5 years is the starting point where you should look at price developments. Anything under 5 years is just pure speculation, and you should actually look at 10 years. I mean, with Bitcoin, it's complicated because Bitcoin is just around for 16 years, so you cannot look beyond that. So I get that point, but at least 5 years you should give yourself to, to look at something, and everything underneath is like, yeah, it's entertainment, maybe speculation, but it's not really doing anything for you if you look at those numbers.
I mean, also like I think it's interesting to think about how the adoption of technology works on 5 year cycles. 5 years for the evolution of a technology is an eternity, right? And put Bitcoin aside, like smartphones really are the same age ish as Bitcoin. And that technology, it changes so much. 17 years ago, everyone was using flip phones. And within 5 years, like every 5 years, that technology changes so much. And then the one that I like to talk about often is like the adoption of email. And when I was just starting my career, my schooling career in university, that was like the kind of the start of mainstream email. And that I started university in 1998, and that was really the first time I got an email address. And at that time, like nobody had the habit of using email. Like I used to never check your email inbox. You miss emails all the time because it just wasn't a normal thing. And 5 years later, when I entered into the workforce, you actually couldn't run a business without email. You couldn't have a job without email. Like that was only 5 years. And so, I often think about the comparison between Bitcoin and email because I was alive for that transition, but it's an information technology for sending messages. And Bitcoin is that too, right? You're just sending messages about value. You're sending information back and forth about property and ownership. And so if we were at 1998 in email today in Bitcoin terms, then in another 5 years, like everybody could be using it. It's totally reasonable. So yeah, I think that it's the propensity for people in the West, I think especially because of like our shortening attention spans, TikTok and Instagram. We've had our ability take a deep breath and zoom out, basically beaten out of us by technology and media. And, because of that, we have almost no ability to just enjoy the ride. Like you said, 7X in 5 years, that's insane. Like, if anybody was owning anything else, they would be so pumped about that, and everybody else would be lining up to buy it. And we should feel that way now because it's going to do that again. Like, so 7X from here over the next 5 years, let's say, so it's 700,000 by 2030. Personally, I think it's going to be a lot more than that. But like, even if it only did that, people would be very excited again. I mean, I think this is, it takes time.
100%. And it's, yeah, I also look at 2030. 2030 is an interesting one because like it's also the 5 years, as you mentioned, from 2025. I mean, now we are very fast approaching already 2026, but we're still in 2025. So 2025, now 5 years later would be 2030. And you mentioned those 5 years. And it's interesting because there's this concept from, I forgot his name. This gradually then suddenly from Parker Lewis, like this concept, and I had him already 2 times on the podcast, and it was really interesting. Where he talks about there's a point in history where all of a sudden it changes really quickly within like 1-2 years, and everyone adopts it. And it's the major change for Bitcoin would probably be a hyperinflation, especially if we see hyperinflation in the G3 nations, so like euro, dollar, or yen. If one of those three is like hyperinflating, man, people will flock because now when a currency is hyperinflating, they're fleeing to one of those three currencies. If someone in the Turkey, like they're going to the euro, maybe in Argentina, they're going to the US dollar. And so what if those three currencies are no longer a safe haven for those other currencies? All of a sudden people are like, oh, what else is there? What else is there to buy? And at that point, hopefully Bitcoin is already stable enough, developed enough to actually be ready for that many people, because we also have to be ready as a network to be onboarding so many people. And that's why I say, like, everyone that is building in Bitcoin, you will be very busy the next 10 years. Like, you will be having a lot of work, and you don't even know where to put all the work that you will be having. And it's so that's why I always say, like, there's no competition in between Bitcoin companies. There might be right now, but if we enter the era that I think we are entering, we need every single person that is currently working in Bitcoin, and probably like 10 times as many companies and people and employees and all of that, because there's a huge influx of new work for all of us, and we are not ready for it, I feel like.
Yeah, I can agree more. It's all hands on deck. Everything you said, I think we are, and the possibility that one of those currencies or all of them hyperinflates, I think is pretty real. I just finished over the weekend Adam Livingston's book, The Great Harvest, which I would recommend for people who are interested. It's kind of a book about the intersection between AI and Bitcoin, and sort of this idea that AI really is, and I believe this is happening. We'll see about how fast it happens, but I mean, observably, the rate at which AI is improving is like astonishing. It's like every few months you can see things that weren't possible. Like 2 years ago, AI couldn't even make a video with fingers in it, and now people can basically create a Hollywood quality movie in their basement. The argument with Great Harvest is sort of basically that AI ultimately, it creates like infinity everything, infinity compute, infinity productivity. It's something that will challenge the very meaning of money itself. And I think that, like, the idea that infinity everything in a world with infinity money would just be a completely nonsensical place to live, and that we're going to have to very soon transition to a finite measurement system to measure a complete transition of the way everything else
The
works.
first thing that every Bitcoiner does, and the most important activity that every Bitcoiner keeps on doing, is buying Bitcoin. And I personally use Relay to buy and sometimes also spend or sell my Bitcoin. And there are two main reasons why I do so. The first one is it's Bitcoin only. They do not do any shit coins. You do not do any cryptos, any stocks, or anything else. This is a tool, an app that is fully focused only and solely on Bitcoin. The second one is self-custody. They give you the keys to your Bitcoin the moment you buy them. You never give them the control over your Bitcoin, and you don't have to trust them because you can verify that you and only you have the keys to your Bitcoin. There's no third-party risk. There's no freezing of your assets. There's no rug pulling. There's nothing of that. Download Relay, the app, on your phone, or go to relay.app on your browser and use code Robin to save fees and get cheaper Bitcoin. I want to tell you about something very special to me. It's called micro seed. If you hold your Bitcoin in self-custody, and you should, you know how critical it is to secure your seed phrase. You should not have them on paper. You should not have them on anything else than titanium. With micro seed, you can engrave your 12 or 24 word seed phrase, the entire seed phrase, onto a 1-inch small washer. Yes, just one washer. All 24 words on that one washer. You can hide that thing everywhere. And even better, you don't need to buy a new kit every time you have to get a new wallet. You can make unlimited backups because MicroSeed is not selling the washer. MicroSeed is selling the device that stamps the washer. So you get the full kit with the device, with the washers, with the hammer, with everything you need to get started today, and you can make with that unlimited amount of backups. Go now to microseed.io.